Good evening. Welcome. Please take your seats. Hello. Welcome to Boise State Listens. My name is Isaac Castellano. I'm the Associate Director for the Institute for Advancing American Values and a faculty member in the School of Public Service. Tonight, we once again get the opportunity to listen to students from across our campus on what they value and why. In a few minutes, I'll ask my colleague, Dalton, Emeritus Faculty in the Department of Economics, and a faculty fellow in the Institute to say a few words about the logistics about tonight's event. First, however, I want to take a few moments and say a few words about the Institute and offer some context for tonight's event. The Institute was established 4 years ago to address the challenges of partisanship on and off campus. Our core mission is to advance understanding and differing interpretations of the values that define and shape the United States of America, to further respectful engagement and critical thinking in public education and public life. Pretty good stuff, I think. In that effort, we have launched Idaho Listens, which has traveled around the state and has been held here at the university every semester since February of 2023. People ask, why the Listens program? Why Boise State Listens? And I normally say this is an opportunity to listen, to hear from a diverse group about what their values are, where they draw those values, what their experiences have been, and for the audience to simply listen. Not to respond, not to argue, not to debate, in the hope that we really hear different perspectives that we're not accustomed to, that we don't cross paths with, and to really understand where folks are coming from. And this feels really vital in our current moment. I think I'm like a lot of Americans in terms of how concerned I am about the direction of our country. I'm concerned about how we are treating one another. I'm concerned about how people feel like they have to hide their views and their values and who they are. I'm concerned about how divided we seem to be. And we can get into the policy positions, who's responsible for what, the history of who did what to whom, who's at fault for the current government shutdown. I teach political science here, so I'm used to some of these debates, and we're always going to have them. There will always be some level of division in our country. Our founding fathers pointed out that a long time ago. You just need to read Federalist Paper number 10 by James Massene, who outlined the nature of factions in a pluralistic society. But these times feel a little bit different. They feel somewhat dangerous. Political violence in the United States, it's not new. But it does feel like we are approaching a new level of frustration, a new level of disillusionment with democracy, and of course with one another as Americans. Some have called directly for political violence, and others have openly abandoned civility. They make the case that the other side cannot be reasoned with. To these folks, I say, no, we can do this democracy thing. There's always going to be time to talk with your neighbors. There is always going to be capacity to be civil. Your voice matters. Your participation matters. But we do need to do something different in American politics. We cannot keep on doing politics as we have been. We need to create space to talk with those with whom we disagree. We need to build more bridges across this divide. And so tonight, I ask all of you, what can be done? What can you do to contribute to a better way of doing politics, to a better way of communicating, to a better way of being civil in our discourse? This is not a call to give up your values, to abandon your positions, rather to embrace our differences. Because as citizens in democracy, we must work together to figure out how we put all of our values together. We can disagree, we can complain, we can argue, but we have to do so with respect for one another, with civility, with grace, and with our humanity intact. And tonight is about just that. We have with us 10 brave students who have volunteered to speak on what they value and why. They are showing us as an example of what this looks like. And I want to thank them for being here tonight. With that, I'd like to invite Dalton to the stage to share with us those logistics, and I want to thank you all for being here. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
As Isaac noted, my name's Alan Dalton, and I'm an emeritus faculty in the Department of Economics, and I'm a faculty fellow with the Institute for Advancing American Values. Pretend I've got a phone in my hand. I left mine at home. If you didn't leave yours at home, would you take this opportunity to either silence it or turn it off? That would be appreciated. Thank you. Some additional thank yous. Today's program is being recorded by University TV, and we wish to thank them. The desserts, which some of you have already partaken of, out in the lobby, were provided by catering and University Event Services. We want to thank them. All of our speakers tonight will be telling their stories in their own words, but they were helped in putting those stories together so that you would understand them better by Nancy Buffington. And we want to thank Nancy for her help. She's right down in here someplace. Both the Idaho Listens program and the Boise State Listens program has been helped by generous contributions by Idaho entrepreneur Greg Carr. He's graciously funded those desserts out in the lobby, and we want to thank Greg for that tonight. At the end of all of our speakers, a QR code will be available for everyone to fill out a feedback form. It's fairly brief, and we would really like to have your feedback. So look for that in the lobby at the end of the event. Our student speakers are from diverse geographic, socioeconomic, political backgrounds. They have different majors. They have different political opinions. Each will speak for 5 to 7 minutes in response to the question, what do you value and why? At the end of the first 5 speakers, we will take a 10-minute break to contemplate what we've heard, and then we will hear from the last 5 speakers. This evening's program is meant to help us practice what Greg Carr calls reverent listening, to practice listening without thinking about or worrying about responding. At the conclusion of all speakers, all 10, and only then, we will thank all of them and then share some desserts. Your job, my job, is to hold all applause and verbal responses till the end. That does not mean that a spontaneous chuckle is forbidden, or a tear, or a smile, but refrain from overt displays, and please refrain from applause. Be silent and respectful as we listen. Be curious as we listen. Be gracious and charitable as we listen. That sounds easy, but we've discovered that this is in fact sometimes very difficult. So maybe it'll help to get some of our energy out by thanking in advance all 10 students who are going to speak tonight. All 10 of our speakers' names are in the program. They will be going in the order that is in the program, so I will actually only be introducing 2 speakers. Okay, once again, remember, please hold your applause. Do not applaud after each speaker. Our first speaker is Kaylee Burbank.
I come from a small town in Idaho named Preston. Some of you might know that name from the movie Napoleon Dynamite. Well, that is my hometown. A spunky comedy based in my hometown, but I bet you don't know what it's actually like to live there. Preston is a small town where Mormonism wasn't just a faith, it was the culture. On nearly every corner stood a church. Every one of my friends was Mormon. My entire family was Mormon. You could basically say everyone was Mormon. To even imagine stepping away from that world felt impossible. And yet that decision, walking away, well, it became the hardest thing I've ever had to do. It cost me friendships, belonging, and even my sense of identity. I was lost, confused, and even angry for a while. But what it gave me in the end was something far more valuable. It taught me the importance of connections without fear of judgment. That's what I value most today. Let me tell you how I got there. It began my freshman year of high school. One evening, my dad and I were driving to a basketball game, and the winter sky was gray, the heater in the car hummed. I glanced at the radio and noticed he was listening to something called Mormon Stories. I didn't know what it was, so I just listened. The voices coming through the speakers weren't praising the Mormon church, they were questioning it. I heard phrases like, "I never felt welcome," "The temple ruined my self-worth," "The history doesn't make any sense," "I feel lost," and "I'm in a faith crisis." My stomach dropped. My dad, who was my rock, someone who I admire and look up to, was listening to this. At 15 years old, my first thought was, he's breaking up our heavenly family. That's how deeply the fear lived in me. I didn't say anything that night, but the questions started pouring in. I started to search for more episodes of that podcast. I was curious, but also terrified. The questions became a lot, so I began to ask subtle questions in church. Instead of answers, I was told to put it on my shelf. A Mormon culture meaning to set aside your doubts and have faith that one day you'll understand. For a while I tried, but the shelf only got heavier. Summer rolled around before my sophomore year. One evening, my family was outside on our back porch, the air warm, the kind of sticky that heat that clings to your skin. A soft breeze pushed through the yard, and my dad had old school rap playing low on a speaker. Every year, right before school, my parents asked us about our goals, what we wanted to accomplish, what we looked forward to. And that night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I surprised myself. I turned to my dad and asked, "Do you still believe in the Mormon church?" The question hung in the air. He looked at me, stunned, surprised I even asked that question. And then he said softly, "No, but I'm still researching, still trying to understand." I turned to my mom. With tears in her eyes, she answered quietly, "I don't know. I'm still searching for my own answers." I felt the air leave my lungs. 1,000 questions rushed forward. Why? What does this mean for our family? What happens now? And what are we going to do? We sat outside for hours that night, talking and questioning. I went to bed even more confused, but also determined. I needed to know more for myself. So, sophomore year of high school hit, and with it came an even deeper struggle. Seminary, the daily religious class, which became unbearable. I sat in those lessons, angry and frustrated, fighting the urge to stand up and shout out my questions. Well, one spring morning, sitting in seminary, my teacher began talking about Joseph Smith's wives. My heart pounded. I had just recently read that one was just shy of her 15th birthday, which basically means she was 14. I raised my hand, voice shaking, and asked if that was true. Silence. He ignored my question. He told me instead to pray with faith, another question on my shelf. Well, that moment was the day that my shelf broke. I left class furious, heartbroken, and unwilling to pretend anymore. That night, I sat at my desk and filled 7 pages, front and back, of every question, every doubt, and every concern I carried. The next morning, I handed it to my teacher and said, "I need the answers to these questions, because without them, I don't think I can stay in this church." And then, just like that, COVID hit. School shut down. I never saw that teacher again. 3 weeks later, an email arrived. I don't know the answers, Just pray and have faith. That was the end for me. But leaving wasn't the relief I imagined. It came with a heavy cost. Instead of conversations, I received accusations. I was told I was lost, that Satan had a hold on me, that I was headed straight to hell. Do you know what happens when a young woman is told that she's bound for outer darkness? Well, she starts to believe it. I lost my sense of direction, and with it, my understanding of who I was. I was anxious, wondering if I would ever belong again, and if I would ever find people who truly understood. And all I ever wanted was, I wasn't looking for agreement. I wasn't expecting everyone to share my beliefs. What I wanted was someone to listen. I wanted someone to listen to me, to truly understand why I had made this decision. I wanted someone to sit with me, to ask why I had made this decision, but I didn't have that. In reality, the most powerful gift we can give each other is the simple act of truly being listened to. Slowing down, listening deeply, and seeking connections. That's what really brings us together. I've learned this not just through my own stories of leaving, but through the people I've met since. During my freshman year, I met another ex-Mormon, and he understood what it was like to walk away. The questions, the loneliness, the search for belonging. That connection reminded me that shared experiences build empathy. And later, I met someone I never, ever thought I would connect with. A friend I once saw as a raging religious Republican. I assumed we had nothing in common, but one coffee conversation changed everything. I listened to her story, her heart, and the values behind what she believed. We found more common ground than I ever imagined. She's now one of my favorite people in the world. Those moments taught me something simple, but life-changing. We don't have to share the same beliefs to share understanding. We don't have to agree to connect. When we listen not to judge, but to understand, we create spaces for healing, growth, and genuine connection. So that's what I strive to do. Now, to listen the way I once wished someone would listen to me, because compassion, not correction, is what truly changes hearts. So now I don't lead with judgment, I lead with curiosity. I don't listen to respond, I listen to understand. Because in a world so quick to speak, the real power belongs to those who choose to listen. So, you might have seen Preston in a comedy, but my experience there, well, it was more of a sad coming-of-age movie, a story about finding myself in a place where I didn't quite belong.
My family is my world, the center of my life, and what keeps my world turning and what makes life worth living. That truth became astronomically clearer when my younger brother's health began to unravel at a young age. Watching someone you love face unexplained illnesses is like standing on a shifting ground, never knowing what will happen next, only that you're going to face it together. While Tanner was 2 years younger than me, we were inseparable when we were little, playing, combining forces, my Barbie dolls, his safari animals, roughhousing in the backyard and walking hand in hand to school together. At 2 years old, he was bigger and stronger than most kids his age. And then something shifted, until one day, his body couldn't make it down the driveway for snow cones. The doctors couldn't explain the joint pain, the GI issues, the extreme weight loss, but most importantly, the life that slowly seemed to be draining out of Tanner's eyes. They dismissed every issue, claiming he was fine for years. Weekly antibody infusions moved from the hospital to the front room couch as his immune system started to succumb to the illnesses at the hospital. Instead of a room full of nurses poking him with needles, it sometimes became me poking him in the thigh, my mom's eyes closed with fear, my dad often gone for work, carrying the weight of trying to keep our family afloat. There were countless years of hospital visits, unresolved diagnosis, unsuccessful treatments, and long days waiting for any small sign of improvement. I never quite realized how serious his illness was getting until a woman showed up at our door asking my brother, "What is your wish?" We knew enough at 8 and 6 years old to understand what a wish kid means. And once the woman left, he turned and asked my mom, "Mommy, am I going to die?" We'd never said it out loud, and we never really even thought of it. But in the middle of all that fear, Tanner's wish became our family's lifeline for some time. Because he'd always dreamed of going on a safari, but couldn't leave the country, Make-A-Wish sent us to give kids the world in Florida, a place that looked and felt like pure magic. For one unforgettable week, Tanner wasn't the sick kid, and our family wasn't frozen in fear or planning the next hospital visit. He was just the boy riding an elephant, eating ice cream for dinner, and celebrating every holiday he could in just a few days. We spent days at Disney World and nights in a village built entirely for children like him, a place where every corner says yes to kids who have heard no for far too long. This trip was bigger than just Tanner's wish. It was a turning point for me. Sitting in that village, surrounded by children whose faces bore the same quiet exhaustion I'd seen in my brother, I realized how many families were living the same nightmare we had been living. I saw parents clutching their kids' hands, trying to memorize every smile, and I felt something shift inside me. Seeing a place entirely built to give sick kids joy made me want to be a part of the reason they could have more than just one magical week. That became the moment I decided I didn't just want to comfort kids like Tanner. I wanted to heal them. I wanted to be the person who walks into a hospital room and brings both answers and hope. Becoming a pediatric surgeon isn't just a career goal for me. It's my way of turning pain into purpose. I want to stand at the front lines for kids who have been told no and give them another chance at yes. I want to fight for diagnosis, for treatments, and for families who feel invisible the way our family once did. Tanner's wish actually showed me my future. A turning point for our whole family came not much longer. One trip to the movies to see Miracles from Heaven, a true story about a young girl who was cured from a rare disease at Boston Children's Hospital. We were inspired to connect to the same doctors who cured her. Walking into this hospital was like opening the gates to a new world. When you climbed the stairs, each step played a musical note that filled the lobby. The bright color transformed the space, and I never thought that somewhere so serious could feel so hopeful. The doctors knew just what to do. Within 16 hours, numerous tests, blood draws, and consultations, they knew what was causing Tanner so much pain for the last 8 years of his life. Boston became a place of miracles. It was where my brother was ultimately given a diagnosis and a treatment plan for hypogammaglobulinemia, a vascular necrosis, and many gastrointestinal issues that changed the course of our lives forever. This city was where my family came together and knew that it would be the four of us forever, and it wouldn't become three. Today, Tanner is almost 18 years old. He's honestly healthier than I am most days, and he just committed to play Division I lacrosse at Utah Tech University. But his illness and our family's journey through it shaped me long before I could ever realize it. Senior year forced me to stop and see that. The firsts, the lasts, the thought of leaving home, of no longer being a part of the daily rhythm of my family, it all hit me at once. I'd always imagined going far away from Boise, chasing that independence, but then one day in December, grabbing coffee, my dad told me, by the time you're 18, you've already spent 90% of your lifetime with your parents. That statistic stopped me cold. 90%. And all of a sudden, distance did not feel like freedom at all. It started to feel like loss. I began to think about what really matters when life is stripped down to its core. I realized that who I am, my values, my resilience, my ability to love and fight for what matters is entirely shaped by my family. They're not just part of my story, they are my story. So I chose differently. I chose Boise State. I chose independence as a full-time student, preparing for medical school, living off campus with my best friends. But staying here means I can also go to my brother's football and lacrosse games, meet my dad for hiking and coffee, and walk the greenbelt with my mom when my classes get canceled. It means being present for the traditions that I once took for granted, going to the pumpkin patch on my mom's birthday, closing the blinds and watching movies on Fun Fridays for hours, or coming home to freshly baked cookies on the kitchen table when I visit. That is my way of honoring my family and honoring the struggles we went through. They are my core value. They give me my why. My family is the reason I am who I am and why I do what I do. I carry their resilience, their love, and their lessons with me constantly as I build a future of service, empathy, and everyday miracles for family just as much as we needed. And in doing so, I hope to be a living reminder that no challenge defines us, no barrier limits us, and no dream is too far when it's fueled by love and purpose. My family's story and mine is not just behind me, it's within me, guiding me forward as I stand here today. I know I carry them into every step, every choice, and every dream yet to come.
I'm sorry, I have a small cramp. I do have this a lot of time lately. I'm 24 years old, and for as long as I can remember, people have told me you have time. I believe that until life reminded me otherwise. 2 years ago, as I was preparing to graduate from college, my godfather, Thomas Lehner, told me he couldn't attend because of personal reasons. He called and said, "Don't worry, we will celebrate at your next graduation." Last November, I received a message that Thomas had passed away. At that moment, I couldn't help but wonder, did we really ever have the time that we thought we did? And whenever I ask people how they get over losing somebody that they love, their answer is always the same: time. So when I think about what I value most, my answer is simple: I value time. But to me, time is not just hours and minutes, it's life itself, how we spend it, who we spend it with, and the meaning it creates. Hi everyone, my name is Baye and Layne Diallo. I'm a graduate student in economy from a small town called Humble in Senegal, West Africa. I lived in a household full of love, because you know how mothers are with their only son, and for the longest time, that was my title. Growing up, time felt abundant. I was young, surrounded by family, and I believed that tomorrow would always be there. After school, my 3 sisters, 2 brothers, my parents, and I would gather around a big bowl of chebujan, our national dish. Those evenings were special, talking about our day, learning from our parents about our culture, and even being taught to respect the food we shared. I was spending the weekend at my grandma, where I would be spending hours with her in the kitchen. She would teach me how to make a very good mafe, and that's probably where I discovered my love for cooking. Spoiler alert, I'm a chef at heart. For me, that was just normal, and I would always have that. But as I grew older, I realized that time is not infinite. It's more limited than money, more fragile than opportunity, and more precious than anything we can own. When I left home at 19 to study in the United States, first at upstate New York, then here in Boise, I carried with me a lesson. Being thousands of miles from my family, I had to make time. Late night call with my parents, quick messages with my friends back home in moments of busy schedule, just to remind them that they are still part of my life. And that's when I truly learned valuing time means valuing people. Because when you give someone your time, you are giving them a piece of your life. Being here also has taught me to make time for new friendship, new opportunity, and new community. I value the moment I have spent biking with Sheikh and David, having long lunch conversation with Trent, or driving to the Blaine County with Andrew, and we talk about how to live sustainably and give an impactful legacy of doing what's right. I love the time I have spent with Brandon and Thea, baking, cooking, studying, or simply discussing. I love my talk with my professor, Dr. Islam, during office hour, or I must say, life hours. Those experiences reminded me that what defines us is not how busy we are, but what we prioritize. These values shape how I see the world. I believe we must respect people's time. This means creating a system where people don't have to wait in unfair line to vote, where workers don't have to choose between endless hours on the job and time with their family, where young people like us have the time to learn, to grow, and to dream. I believe in policy that value not just productivity, but the human need for balance and rest. No economy can thrive if its people are burned out. And for me, time is deeply tied to education. Every hour we spend studying, teaching, or mentoring multiply into the future. A teacher's time with a student can change a life. The time we dedicate to research can shape generation. That's why I see time not as something to kill, but as something to cultivate and to harvest. In the end, valuing time means living with intention. It means recognizing that we won't always be young, that our parents and grandparents won't always be here, that friendship and love need presence and care to grow. It means remembering that time is not promised, so we must choose carefully how we spend it and with whom. That's why when I wake up in the morning, I make sure I spend an hour a day talking with my best friend back home, like giving him a full update about my life, keeping in touch with a long list of friends and cousins from France to Australia and beyond. My friend Fatou Abdunyai told me that I'm the definition of enjoy your 20s because I see time as a gift. I have been in 44 countries, live in 3, and I have carried so many memories in this travel journey that later on, I can look back and say, wow, I am proud I used my time in my 20s the best way I could. Here is the thing. One day we will sit down to our last meal with our loved one. One day, we will take our final car ride or board our last flight or even listen to our favorite soundtrack. One day we will press send for our last message or make call we never know will be our final goodbye. The haunting truth is that time never announced its ending. Most of those moments will arrive disguised as ordinary day. While we are busy filling our schedule, making plans for tomorrow, next week, next year, but tomorrow is not promised. None of it ever was. So tonight, I don't just want to talk about my value, I want to leave you with a challenge. Ask yourself, am I spending my time with the way that reflects who I want to be? Because at the end of the day, our calendar might be full, but our heart only holds on to what truly matters. And please do me a favor. Before you go to bed tonight, take 5 minutes to reach out to someone you love, especially if there has been a silence or a small disagreement. Because life is not that serious. Send that text, make that call, because one day you won't have the chance, and you might wish you had. I value time because when you honor it, you honor life itself.
If I had $1 million, you might think I'd buy a house, one with a wraparound porch, double doors, and ceilings tall enough to hold a 12-foot Christmas tree. Maybe you'd imagine I'd use it to travel the world, Australia, Vienna, Turkey, all places on my bucket list. Or perhaps you'd assume I'd pay off school, because wanting to go to law school isn't exactly cheap. The truth is, I wouldn't spend it on any of those things. If I had $1 million, I would buy the one thing I believe money can buy: peace of mind. And since I do not have peace of mind, then I have no choice but to have resilience, fostered by the experience of living with my brother. I remember one moment as clearly as if it were yesterday, the deafening ring in my ears as I fell backwards onto the cafeteria floor after a kick to my stomach delivered by my little brother. I gasped for air while the laughter and screams of my classmates echoed. Only a year younger than me, he stood on top of a cafeteria table, every student in my brand new middle school watching. Through the blur of lights and tears, I saw my teachers pulling him down as he fought in his own way, kicking, biting, screaming. The pain in my stomach hurt less than the pain I felt as they carried him away. I couldn't calm him down. I couldn't protect him. To everyone else, it looked like chaos, but to me, it was another trial in his daily battle. and a loss I endured. And yet he was there. He survived. That's resilience. My brother's severe level 4 autism, his obliterating disability, is the battle he faces every single day. It ties him to a strict routine, wearing the same yellow shirt. There's about 20 copies of them in his closet. He never has been able to have a sleepover or a birthday party with his own friends. He sat in a classroom by himself, his world reduced to repetition and isolation, and he cannot sit still for long periods of time. He cannot effectively communicate how he feels. He wasn't able to earn a regular high school diploma or walk at graduation. He will never drive a car, hold a job, attend college, or get married. And yet he endures. He survives. That's resilience. My family carries that resilience too. We take 2 cars to every event in case of a public meltdown. The 7 of us have never been on a family vacation because we cannot go on an airplane or stay in a hotel. We don't like to sing happy birthday because the sound will send him into a rage. My little sisters can't have stuffed animals, and my other brother can't play the piano. We have gotten used to sacrificing joys for peace. We don't watch TV because the noise shreds his ears. We've been kicked out of church because he can't stay quiet long enough for a service. Our lives are held hostage by his routine, and if one piece goes wrong, the whole day can collapse. Mourning the loss of someone who is still alive is all-consuming, and yet we survive. That's resilience. Resilience is what I value most. It is the armor that allows us to withstand life's battles, and sometimes it's the armor we carry for others when they cannot carry it themselves. My entire life, I've been a part of my brother's armor, with my family making up the rest. Every shot aimed at him, every blow he takes, we try to absorb first. And those shots hurt. They break us down. They bring agony, pain, exhaustion, but still we stand. We stand together, believing that God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers, and some days the weight of that truth feels unbearable, but still we stand. I'm a firm believer that if you have resilience and you have enough of it, the shield you hold will be stronger than Captain America's, stronger than any system that tries to break you, stronger than any weapon life throws at you. This value shapes my beliefs and my worldview. Resilience isn't just personal to me, it's reflected in American society. For families like mine, resilience means navigating systems with too few resources, too little support, and too many barriers. The mental and financial burden of needing to place my brother in a home as he has grown more unstable with age and needs more support is overwhelming, as services are stretched too thin. With no government assistance, it would quite honestly take $1 million to buy that peace of mind. According to the CDC, 1 in 31 children are now diagnosed with autism. While that spectrum is wide, that number represents millions of families like mine. Families forced to live around resilience because society gives them no other option. With no options or cures being pursued, resilience feels less like a virtue and more like a demand imposed by an unjust system. The weight of what we must do sits heavy on our shoulders because the truth is there are no options. The only choice we have is to keep standing, to keep surviving. And when my parents can no longer carry that weight, it will fall to me, and I will stand, I will survive. So if I had $1 million, now you know what I would do. I wouldn't buy a house big enough for a 12-foot Christmas tree, or a ticket to Australia, or even my education. I would buy peace of mind, so my family could finally lay down our shields of resilience.
Tonight, you've heard from and will hear from many people who overcame enormously challenging situations and experiences. That is not what you'll hear from me. I'm incredibly grateful that my life has not been challenging. I grew up in a loving home with parents who supported me through everything I've ever dreamed of doing. and I have an amazing girlfriend. These facts make it difficult, however, to write speeches like this or apply to graduate schools, two things that have been on my mind recently. That's why I've decided that this evening, instead of telling you all about a difficult, life-changing moment, I'll share my journey as I learn to understand my most important value, education. It seems like I was destined to love education. Both of my parents are educators, my grandparents were teachers, and my aunt is a vice principal who taught for many years. I even get birthday cards from my parents' former high school teachers. As a very young child, I understood that the value of an education was that I was correct and that I knew more than other people. My parents like to tell a story about a time when they took me to D&B Supply to buy a little animal figurine. When I gave the toy to the cashier to check out, she asked me in a perfectly reasonable tone to speak to a 3-year-old, "Can you say buffalo?" To which I responded, "Buffalo? But that's a North American bison." At that moment, I knew that I was educated because I was right. When I started school, my parents told me that they didn't care what grades I got, as long as I was trying my best. However, when it became apparent to me that my best was an A, I became more concerned than ever with knowing everything that I could about every subject. The last time that I got a B on my report card was in Mr. Gibson's 5th grade music class. And given that I'm still talking about it well into 16th grade, you can probably all guess that I'm still a little upset about it. When I got into middle school, I started watching Jeopardy and competing for my school's Quiz Bowl team. Both of these activities rewarded me for having a vast amount of facts and using them in competition with others. Then, in my freshman year of high school, I had the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. and compete in the National Quiz Bowl tournament. In addition to competing, we toured all of the Smithsonian's and did a night tour of all the various presidential memorials. We also visited the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and that was a truly life-changing experience. When you arrive at the Holocaust Museum, they give you a little card containing information about a Jewish person who was killed during the Holocaust. It contains their name, their occupation, the names of their family members, and other personal details, so that as you walk through the museum, you'll do it in their shoes. And think about what it would be like to experience the darkest period in human history. When I walked through the museum, I encountered some of the most horrifying things I've ever seen. I walked through a room with thousands of shoes taken from prisoners kept at concentration camps. I stood inside of a gassing chamber. And I also learned what the Nazis thought of education. When Hitler first rose to power in Germany, one of the first things that he did was remove any professors or administrators who didn't comply with his demands to turn the country's universities into breeding grounds for hatred and anti-Semitism. He knew that if the German people were allowed to be educated, if they were allowed to learn the truth about why they were suffering, or learn that their rights were being taken away, then his regime could not survive. I feel confident in saying that the Holocaust Museum is the quietest place on the planet. Nobody talks or makes any noise, except for the quiet sobs of people learning about horrors they couldn't have comprehended when they walked through the door. Whether that silence is brought on by reverence or terror, it is the sound of education leading to empathy and a resolve to never let anything like the Holocaust happen ever again. I was in DC to show that I could recite facts better than anyone else. As I walked out of the museum and looked across the National Mall to the Washington Monument, I realized that education is more than just knowledge. It is the single greatest tool that we can use to inspire empathy and preserve freedom. In the United States, we know that education is key for the survival of our democracy. In 1789, Thomas Jefferson argued about education that no other sure foundation can be devised for the preservation of freedom and happiness. And the data backs up this claim. All across the world, as literacy rates rise, so do levels of democracy. Widespread education allows citizens to know what's going on in their countries. It also builds empathy, which is even more important than knowledge. When we know about each other's struggles, It is human nature to care about solving the problems we all face. As Thomas Paine would say, that's just common sense. At this point, it shouldn't surprise you that I decided to attend college and major in political science. Early on, I was introduced to Freedom House, an organization that has been researching and promoting democracy around the world since the 1940s. Every year, they give each country a score from 0 to 100 that represents how strong its democracy is and how free its citizens are. In 2024, the United States scored an 84. That's a B in democracy. And if you thought that perhaps we would be saved if Freedom House graded on a curve, you'd be wrong. The United States of America does not crack the top 50 countries in the world in terms of democracy rating. We're tied with Mongolia for 54th. For me, a person still upset about a B from 5th grade music, this reality is unacceptable. I'm a competitive guy. I want the United States to sit atop this ranking. And 20 years ago, we did. We received similar ratings to the world's most democratic nations like Sweden and Finland and New Zealand. The good news is we have a path forward: education. Prioritizing and protecting our education system to ensure that future generations are knowledgeable and empathetic might be our best chance to get our grade up and earn that A in democracy. As I continue on to grad school next year, I'm excited to have the opportunity to continue my education and to try and make our country and the world a more free place. I encourage everyone here tonight to learn as much as you can about everything that you can. You might just change our country for the better.
We will take a short break here and resume at 7:58. Thank you for your attentive and reverent listening, and thank you for holding your applause. Our first speaker for part 2 is Lucy Ford.
One summer, 7 years ago, my family and I took a trip to Yellowstone. The first day we spent sightseeing, having a delicious meal in the lodge, and eating huckleberry candies. When we settled into our cute little cabin for the night and got ready for bed, I noticed strange little bumps on the gums of my teeth and tongue. I ignored it, assuming they were canker sores or something that would go away overnight. When I woke up in the morning, I was exhausted and I felt like I was having a severe allergic reaction. My aunt gave me several doses of Benadryl, and I spent the day dozing off in the car while my family drove across the park to the one clinic in Yellowstone. Once we got there, the clinic pumped me full of several doses of adult epinephrine, and my dad drove me home that night. The next morning at 5 a.m., he could tell I wasn't doing well, so he woke me up and, despite my protest, drove me to the ER. The doctor quickly recognized that I had a rare autoimmune reaction called Stevens-Johnson syndrome. I was life-flighted to the Boise Children's Hospital, where I proceeded to spend several weeks in the ICU. I was pretty drugged the whole time, going in and out of surgeries, so I don't remember much of the time I spent in the hospital. Most of my memories from those weeks consisted of moments I would wake up in pain and push a little red button to give me medicine to make me feel better, but never really did, or waking up feeling like I couldn't breathe. But the one thing I remember most was the moments I would wake up, look over, and see my godmother and her husband sitting there with my parents, or when my family friend walked in the door, and for a second, things felt a lot better. I remember in my last few days in the hospital opening packages from friends who I never would have expected to have done something so sweet. When it was finally time to get out of the hospital, my parents and I got into the car. I didn't really know how to feel or what to think. I felt a little bit alien. I had just disappeared from the world for weeks. Everything on the news was different. Even the songs people were listening to had already changed, and my face and mouth were all torn up. At one point, I even had a lady ask if I had fallen off and been trampled by a horse. I was scared to try and go back into the world. I remember looking at myself in the little car mirror and being scared to get out of the gas station and have people look at me strange. When we pulled into the gravel driveway and I walked up the stairs into my house, I opened the door and the entire house was decorated with streamers and balloons. Walking into our dining room, there was a giant poster laying out on the dining room table with all of my neighbors' names signed on it, welcoming me home. After a little while, my friends next door came over. I was nervous to talk to people, and when I saw them, I could tell that they were a little taken back by how weird I looked. But all it took was about 3 minutes and one joke before we were giggling together like I was completely fine and nothing had happened. I remember mornings after being released from the hospital, I would wake up and cry because I was in pain from not having moved my body in weeks. And I was getting rid of all the different drugs that I had been pumped full of. I remember my dad sitting on the bed with me and letting me cry until I felt good enough to get up and just get dressed for the day. I would force down the food I needed to eat as fast as I could and run over to the neighbor's house to play with my friends because as soon as I did, I felt normal. I remember several of my other neighbors coming over and comforting my mother as I saw her cry for the first time since it had all happened. Months and years later, I would have friends tell me that when they were told I was in the hospital, they cried themselves to sleep because no one knew if I was going to make it. I remember my family from all over the country sending me things they knew would make me feel better and calling to check in on how I was doing. It was painful and scary, and I'm sure the entire experience was even worse for my parents. But it meant I learned a lesson really early in life that I'm really grateful for. I learned that when you're struggling, people will come out of the woodworks to support you. I learned that there's always more people who care about you than you'll ever realize. I learned the importance of being there for people and letting them know how much you love them because nothing has ever meant so much for me as all the people who showed up for me when I was struggling. I learned that summer how incredibly lucky I am to have so many amazing people in my life. I realized that your family and friends can make even the hardest times good, and that the people in your life are what make your life worth living, to never take those people for granted. Sometimes I get in my head or I feel overwhelmed, but every time what snaps me out of it is spending just 5 minutes joking around with my friends, or a hike with my mom where it feels like we talk through everything, or long phone calls with my best friend that are somehow never less than an hour. I learned 7 years ago that what I value most is the people in my life, and since then, people's capacity for compassion has never failed to amaze me. This is a value I've not only applied in my personal connections, but also in how I view the world. In the world that often feels consumed by anger and division, it is important to focus on the small acts of kindness and humility that show us there is far more love and care around us than hate. Maybe I have a naive or misguided hope for humanity, but what I see is that people will continue to show up for each other in a whole variety of ways, and that will always give me hope.
Authenticity is something many of us wrestle with, especially as we grow and try to understand who we are beneath the layers shaped by puberty, expectations, and change. Life was simple when I was younger. I remember getting out of bed and looking out my window to see a backyard full of white, fresh snow. I was a big fan of the thrill that came with sledding, so I got dressed in my pink snowsuit, ready to tackle the Washington winter. Our backyard had this homemade playset where there's 2 swings, a rock climbing area, and the infamous yellow slide. I thought pushing myself off of that would give me a speed boost like no other. While fighting the cold, my nose dripping, ears red, I took in a deep breath before I pushed myself off the top of that playground. Now, at the same time, my dad made his way downstairs to make his favorite cup of morning coffee. He stood by the kitchen sink sipping his drink and took in the stillness of the white backyard. Then, the innocent 4-year-old me came rushing down the playground, headed straight for a tree. He rushed outside trying to get my attention, but I was laughing and screaming too loud for me to hear him. Then, when it got too fast, I jumped off the sled, face deep in a pile of snow. As my sled slowly came to a stop right in front of that very tree. As I shook off the snow off my face and body, I look over to see my dad just as white as that very snow around us. Although I probably gave him his second heart attack and somehow ended up with 3 brothers as punishment. Coincidence? I think not. Life was simpler back then. The purity of childhood where there were no responsibilities and life seemed timeless. No fears of getting hurt, innocence, little moments compared to the big world around us. But life didn't stay that simple. Weeks before middle school started, everything began to change. I had discovered I had scoliosis. Scoliosis is when your spine forms abnormal curves, causing your spine to not grow straight. I remember my dad driving me to an appointment that was supposedly going to help my back. This wasn't like any type of appointment, but an appointment where I had to get my body molded so doctors can create a back brace for me. I remember stopping at Dutch Bros on my way to an appointment to get a drink. I ordered the Freedom drink, which is ironic, and it is this vanilla frosty with blue and red raspberry drizzle. Now, even though I am a sugarholic, I remember not being able to touch the drink due to all the nerves I was feeling. To help with the dreading idea of having to wear a back brace for 23 hours a day, 7 days a week for months on end, the doctors asked me if I wanted to customize my back brace. They had countless of colors, patterns to choose from, and hoping to show off my back brace, I chose this pink, blue, purple sunset with palm trees. Wanting to be seen with a normal body, I was instructed to stand on how to stand to allow them to get accurate measurements of my brace, my body. And wanting to be seen as normal, I had manipulated my 13-year-old body to fit in a mold that I believed was just that. I stood as tall as possible, tucked in my stomach, and struggled to breathe as they wrapped this paper mesh-like substance around my waist to my collarbone. As the substance dried, and they made a straight cut along my spine, and that's how my back brace was made. Days passed, and it was time to try on this 2-inch thick plastic brace. The second this brace went around my body and they tightened the Velcro, my confidence was stripped away from me. I struggled to breathe and felt like I was in this shell and couldn't be myself. I felt anxious, depressed, my personality, my light taken away. Throughout middle and high school, I struggled with back pains, spasms, flare-ups, you name it. But eventually I stopped wearing the brace because I stopped growing. However, this was a part of me I thought I could never escape. Not until the summer of 2022. My dad had the opportunity to move due to his job, and I jumped at the opportunity of it. The idea of a fresh start where I can control what people knew about me. And although I still struggled to get out of my shell and get out there, I learned something that changed me for the better. One evening, I was really hungry and wanted to get out to my favorite restaurant. No one wanted to go with me, however, because it was getting late and everyone was settling down. And although I was scared of being seen alone in a restaurant because it seems lonely or I'm a loser, I learned it's okay to be uncomfortable. Funny enough, I learned that being uncomfortable made me even more confident in myself. I would recover faster in awkward situations, like tripping over my own feet in public, waving back to someone who wasn't even waving at me, or when the server says, "Enjoy your meal," and I say, "You too," and instantly regret it. Slowly, I was able to build a stronger understanding of myself and who I am as a person. I began to recognize traits I once gave up and tried to hide, like my quirky humor, my tendency to overthink, and my love for the little things. And to my surprise, these were the very things that my friends loved about me most. Learning what I valued in myself helped me find the kind of community I was always searching for, one where I didn't have to be anyone but me. Learning to explore on my own, whether in a new state or an environment, has taught me that authenticity isn't something you find overnight. It's something you grow into, one uncomfortable step at a time. And maybe, just maybe, authenticity isn't something you chase, but something you uncover when you're brave enough to be seen for who you are. So if you could take something away from my story, let it be this. It's okay to be different. It's okay to stand out. Embrace your awkwardness, your quirks, your imperfections, your random obsessions, your bold dreams, everything that makes you you. So stand tall, even if it feels unnatural. Laugh loud, even if your voice cracks. Because the world doesn't need more people trying to blend in. It needs more people brave enough to stand out.
When I was a kid, my dad liked to lay down with me by our brick fireplace and take turns drawing stories. He would draw a bowling alley, and I would draw ducks inside it. Then he would draw a cow, and I would draw a much stockier, straight-legged cow. Even though he's never considered himself an artist, my dad was the first artist I ever looked up to, and he's the reason art has blossomed into such a fundamental value for me. Okay, I'm gonna tell you a story that's gonna seem unrelated, but just bear with me for a second. One time, I showed my parents a picture of these beautiful pastel houses stacked along a cliffside in Italy overlooking a gorgeous ocean view. And I remember saying to them, "It's just so beautiful. How could anyone be sad in a place like that? And at the time, I had no idea that was Cinque Terre, the place where my dad threw out his back over their honeymoon and had to spend 3 days cooped up in a hotel room with my mom, completely unable to stand. And when they told me that, it felt so obvious. Of course you can be sad anywhere. It doesn't matter how colorful it is. So, when I sunk into the deepest depression of my life, I was in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by my bright yellow walls, plastic cherry blossoms, and the pink cat sticker I stuck to the ceiling in elementary school. And it made all too much sense. You can be sad in any place. For me, it was the summer before college, and I had no idea how to deal with the deep sense of grief I felt. And in that awful time, there was really only one thing that pulled me through. I decided to pick up sewing again. I made plans to go to Comic-Con with my best friends, and I made a purple satin ball gown out of a free pattern from YouTube. It didn't fix or cure anything, not by a long shot, still one of the worst summers of my life, and there's not even really a grander spiritual reason this helped, but it literally just gave me something to do with my hands. I got to feel like I was making progress on something, and I could actually see it take shape. The ball gown had unironed hems that kind of pooched out everywhere, and my patterning was awful, but creating that dress was my coping mechanism. And ever since then, I've learned that I just need to have a project of some sort when times get rough. So, essentially, art is all about the process to me. And that's something I've had to think more and more about in recent years. So, let's rewind a few years. My high school graphic design teacher, he is an awesome guy, and he has shaped so much of the way I think about art. He's a dad with this curly dark beard, and that's kind of graying in the middle, and square black glasses. And I worked with him over a few summers teaching art camps. And one of those times, I remember asking his opinion on the rise of artificial intelligence in the art world. And I remember him telling me, the most important thing is your ideas. AI might be able to recreate your art on a surface level, maybe even do it better, but putting intention into every aspect of a piece, that's something only you can do. And unlike me, he's had to fully embrace AI because of his job as a teacher. He sees it as an inevitability we have to learn to work with rather than reject. And I just can't accept that for myself. Art wouldn't mean anything to me if I skipped the meat of the process. I'd rather be there from start to finish and end up with something that looks crappy than end up with something that I didn't actually make. For example, this summer I got really obsessed with learning how to make stuffed animals. I downloaded a pattern online, borrowed some old blanket fabric from a friend, and I devoted myself to a craft I was a complete beginner at. And after pouring hours of my life into it, I walked downstairs to show my hard work to my mom, and she laughed at it. My ever-supportive mother, who has always encouraged my creative pursuits, laughed in my face because it was so ugly. And yes, I do have it here today. And I can see where she was coming from. So I sat down, I tried again, and the next one was still bad. And then I tried a third time, and I sewed the body on backwards, stuffed it with fabric scraps and literal notebook paper, and broke basically all the rules of sewing. But I had so much fun doing it. Because art isn't about the end result. It's about the process of creation you take to make it. And art can be anything you put creativity and intention into. It can be paintings, it can be writing, it can be making a playlist for a friend or building a house in Minecraft. The important thing is you're creating something with intention. For a little extra background, I'm also a Christian, and I've never really found a way to worship that comes naturally to me. And I'm sure even if I tried to incorporate God in my art, it would come out pretty forced. But I've found that the act of creation itself is kind of a connection with God for me. It's one small way I can mirror him, no matter what my intentions are with every individual piece. And part of me feels disingenuous saying that because it's not like I start drawing and I suddenly feel this connection with the creator of the universe. Half the time I forget he's there, but it's worship in the same way it's a coping mechanism to me. Art can't fix everything, and it's not really a vehicle for divine revelations, but God gave me a passion for it, and I've been chasing that down my whole life. So even if I don't feel spiritually connected to God through my art or anything, and you can still be sad in a beautiful place making beautiful things, pouring so much of my time into it is a way of looking back at the original artist and saying, I understand you this much more. So it's not that far of a stretch to say that art and all created things are literally the purpose of life for me. Even though it started as rectangular cows by the fireplace, I value the act of creation, and I believe it is one of the most meaningful things a person can do.
I want to begin my speech by introducing you to my hero. His name is Corey, and he's my dad. There are few men in this world that could spend 3 months teaching their 7-year-old daughter to wakeboard and never lose his mind, but he did. He's patient, and he's kind, and he's determined. He's a man who finds a new niche hobby every year, and he does his best to get my brother and I involved. I have done everything from CrossFit workouts to canning our own applesauce to wiring my newly renovated bathroom with him. He is a man who loves excessive amounts of whipped cream on his chocolate chip cookies and is not afraid to bust out a witty t-shirt. He is the best dad a girl could ask for. After learning this, it might surprise you that he is the reason I cried myself to sleep at the age of 16. I was ashamed, to talk about him because when I did, people made assumptions about him and they made assumptions about me, and they were not afraid to share them. One of these came from a guy named Jake. Jake and I met as peer mentors on our high school's Special Olympics robotics team. Jake is someone that I would have considered a friend, but we were not incredibly close. As a result, Jake had never met my dad. This did not stop him from texting me one night ranting about how horrible my dad was and calling him a pig. Now you might be wondering what my dad could have possibly done to warrant these reactions. It was less about what he had done and more about his line of work. My dad is a police officer. Now for some context as to why I was crying myself to sleep, my dad was a police officer in a city bordering Seattle during 2020, and I was 16. Every night, I watched as police officers handled new riots, were spit on, had fireworks lit and thrown at them, and their cars were blown up. I watched this while being sent pictures of my dad in full riot gear because he was being sent to help with crowd control. I was petrified that I would fall asleep and wake up to learn I didn't have a dad. The first call after every breakup, and the man who knew all I needed was a hug. The man who wasn't afraid to match with me while touring colleges, just gone. My dad has been a police officer for 27 years, and he's worked on countless assignments ranging from running the police academy in the city of St. Paul to sex crimes investigations to now doing recruitment. He's darn good at what he does too. He was one of the lead investigators on the city of St. Paul's first serial rapist case. He helped put away a man who raped 6 women for 43 years. Police work is just his way of serving his community. And despite all of the struggles of police work, with people hating cops purely because of their line of work, legislators creating laws limiting their ability to do their job, and a general distrust of law enforcement, he has continued to work as a police officer. My mom and I, who are much less chill about what police have gone through, have asked him about these struggles and how he remains so committed to his work. His response is always that he understands that some people don't like cops and some people never will. but he doesn't let that deter him from doing or loving his job. He is of the mindset that it is his job to help anyone in need. It doesn't matter if they were the ones screaming at the police officers. If they need help, he will be there with an unbiased and helping hand. He is a great example of why we cannot put everyone into boxes based off of one piece of information. My dad is not a dirty cop. He is not racist, and his goal has always been to help make his community safer. This is why I no longer shy away from telling people he's a police officer. Police officer or not, my dad is someone to be incredibly proud of. His police work is just an extra aspect of the pride that I have for him. I challenge everyone here, when you learn a fact about someone that gives you an instinctual reaction, lean into that feeling, especially the negative ones. Investigate further. There are a lot of different people who fall under similar umbrellas, and their reasons why might be a lot different than you think. You just have to ask some questions. To help demonstrate this, I asked my dad the main reasons his coworkers joined the police force, and he gave me 4 main answers. The first was that they felt called to service. This was also my dad's reason. The second reason was that they wanted to help people. The third, they wanted to hold the bad guys accountable. And fourth, they wanted to give back to their community. We never fully know what drives people, so I encourage you to approach everyone with love, compassion, and a genuine desire for understanding, even the Jakes in your life. Because I may have forgiven Jake for what he said, but I've never forgotten. With love in your heart, you can be better about connecting with people who are different from you, but also those that you are similar to. I want to leave you all with a Bible verse that sums up my message. It comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 14, and it says, "Let all that you do be done in love."
There's been some lovely speeches so far. And in order to kind of clue you in on my values, I probably have to introduce you to 1 or 2 people. I was raised by my mother, who was this Wiccan, pagan witch with a face full of piercings and a huge neck tattoo and a mohawk of dreads. And compared to her, I look like a Roth IRA. And, you know, this small little white woman would smudge the house. And if you don't know what that is, it's where you take some sage and you light it up, and it wards off the bad energy and vibes in the house. And between these fun idiosyncrasies and her overall look, it's safe to say she stood out a little bit. And on the other side, I was raised by my father, who was this 6 foot, 280, 300-pound guy with biceps and a chest bigger than my future, and huge hands. And I always joked that he was this caveman who would just drag his knuckles everywhere he went. And he had this large, booming voice and kind of this smoker rasp to it because he'd smoke a pack or 2 a day. And he was this weird conspiracy theorist where he'd fill me in on, ooh, this is what I think happened. And I'd be like, all right, Dad. And I could share a million stories of the 2 of them, and I could share my other parental influences. But I found those 2 alone were more than enough controversy, more than enough polarization on both sides of the aisle. And that polarization led me on a path towards radical acceptance. And so I found kind of all of this through the years of court that I went through with them, the CPS visits, both sides of the aisle throwing accusations at each other of blackmail, of heinous crimes, of just venom and anger between them. And it's safe to say they wanted their pound of flesh. And they took this out on themselves. They took them out on each other. They took it out on their home. And that went on for most of my childhood, and I was born with cystic fibrosis. This illness that I lived, for better or worse, where I had been on Medicaid my whole life, where, some of my medications cost $20,000, or more. And I was a freshman in high school. I was this skinny, pale kid, if you think I'm skinny now. And I don't remember every detail, but my stepfather at the time was changing jobs, and we ended up losing insurance. We ended up losing Medicaid. And I ended up with my cystic fibrosis. My lung function, it went down to about 63%. That's my PV1 percentage. And I lost another 20 or 30 pounds from where I'm at now. And I was a human xylophone at that. And, I felt nothing but venom. That in losing my insurance, I felt I'd been cast out of this system, a system built for someone who was only cared about if you were a paying customer, if you were able to front the bill of this red pill or that blue pill. And it didn't really matter because that rainbow of pills ended up costing more than the car in my driveway. And I just felt so horrible and so helpless that I thought, my God, man, I'm a child. Who do I have to talk to? Who do I have to find to get my pound of flesh? And I modeled that same anger I had seen in my parents through court and towards each other and tearing apart a house from a home. And when after this, I recovered and I got insurance, that tumultuous nature followed me into these relationships. That it kept following me, this anger and this venom, until eventually at 15 years old, I moved in with my grandfather. And this man, he was 5'3" on a good day, big white beard, kind of looked like a garden gnome. And I moved in with him, and he had this large temper, that same anger, that same venom. And as I got to know him, I noticed that we had those same patterns. We had both dealt with, alcoholism in our family, abuse in court, and these horrible, scathing things. And, before I moved in with my grandfather, I didn't know the difference between a flathead and a Phillips. He taught me what it was like to be a man, and more importantly, he taught me to help myself, to give me those tools to dissect where I was at. And really, I had no choice but to love him for the way he was, and to see that venom, and see it in the people I walk across every day, and see it's a response to love. And so when I watched my mother with this identity of being goth before it was cool, and carrying all these markings and piercings and tattoos, what I think I didn't see was the underlying problems of this bipolar and borderline personality disorder. I saw this anger and this venom. And my father, I watched his, I didn't see his politics or the cigarettes in his pocket. I saw this anger and this venom that he felt his children had been taken from him. And I saw in myself a child who had his livelihood taken away, that I felt pity. And I see it a lot. I see a system that takes livelihoods away from adults and children alike. And so I saw that we lack the infrastructure, we lack those tools to take care of one another. And so my value that I found is that my grandfather, as well as teaching me the difference between a flathead and a Phillips, taught me to love and foster trust in my fellow man. That when I look at him, when I look at the people I love, and I look at the news and I freak out and I say, the world's on fire, man. I see it in the news, I see it on YouTube, and they can look at me, and then they could say, if the world's on fire, man, we're the water that's going to put it out.
I hope you leave here tonight thinking about the stories you've heard and how that might affect your interactions with your friends and your foes. There's a feedback form in the lobby. Please pick it up and fill it out for us. We'd appreciate that. Thank you for coming. Come up and talk to our speakers tonight if you have something that you would like to say. I'm sure they would appreciate it. Thank you for attending Boise State Listens.